It's not just LDL that can cause clogging of the blood vessels. That's about 5 different types of cholesterol that can all cause an issue.
The way I see the whole cardiovascular disease process is you got to have inflammation.
Yep.
You got to have endothelial dysfunction, like you just mentioned, and then oxidative stress. You put all those together and shake them up in a bottle, and those are going to be your markers that are going to drive cardiovascular disease.
When you're looking at cholesterol, are you looking at the smoke or the fire?
Welcome to The Trusted Pharmacist, where you'll learn the truth about how the body works.
Welcome back to The Trusted Pharmacist. It's your host, Steve Hoffart. And when it comes to cholesterol, we've been told this same story. LDL is bad, HDL is good, and statins are all the answer. But the latest science says, we need to look a little deeper at that. And today I have just the guest for this, Dr. Yousef Elyaman. And he is going to take and look at a deep dive of all this science and the truth, what today we're learning about cholesterol and all those crazy myths. Dr. Elyaman, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So just a quick background on Dr. Elyaman. He's a board-certified internist and cross-specialized in pediatrics. He's also with the Institute of Functional Medicine as a faculty member and founder of Absolute Health in Ocala, Florida. Certified in psychological trauma, which I found that out to be pretty interesting. He's recognized nationally for his expertise in advanced cardiometabolic testing and integrative approaches to heart disease. Today, he joins me to cut through those myths about cholesterol and statins and vascular health. So let's jump right in. So, question for you. High cholesterol, is it a disease or is it a symptom?
All right. So a disease or a symptom or a marker of longevity, because some people with high cholesterol actually may live longer.
Very good. I like that one. Because it's a little more complicated than just looking at a cholesterol panel. Let's look at that right off the bat. So, I mean, almost everybody goes to the doctor, and it's crazy is even in my functional medicine journey, which I'm not near as profound as what you are, I learned about advanced lipid panels like 15 years ago. But we're in 2025 and I get patients bring in labs all the time and it's just a cholesterol panel.
Right.
And my analogy is if we're going to determine your risk of heart disease, looking at a cholesterol panel is trying to see if you have cracks in your driveway at 30,000 feet in the air, which is virtually impossible. Tell me your thoughts about a standard cholesterol panel and how advanced cholesterol markers are really better indicatives of heart disease and cardiovascular risk.
Right. So I think I really love that analogy because I really think that's what it is. There's actually data that shows that over 50% of heart attacks that can end in death happen in people with normal cholesterol. So if it was really just a cholesterol thing, then we could take a look at their cholesterol numbers, get their cholesterol numbers down, and then we have a significant decreased risk in strokes and heart attacks. And it's way more complicated than that. But I'll tell you, even with the regular standard cholesterol panel, I think it makes sense to look at what it's actually looking at. And with that, in the right with the right eyes, even though it's an archaic test, it's a nice first test. It's an archaic test, though. There's a lot more information we can get. But you can actually pick up little clues looking at just a regular cholesterol panel that people don't look at. So
Got it.
With the regular cholesterol panel, one of the things that you look at is a total cholesterol. And the challenge with the total cholesterol is that you are looking at LDL, which is the protein or the carrier. Think of it like a carrier. It's the carrier that takes cholesterol to the different tissues. And if you don't have cholesterol, you die, right? You need cholesterol for brain function. You need cholesterol to make hormones. You need for certain vitamins. So you need cholesterol for all these things. And if you can't move cholesterol where it needs to go, you have a problem. And that's that your body won't be able to function. So total cholesterol is looking at the LDL, the type of cholesterol that's sometimes called bad cholesterol, but it's really not fair to the LDL. It looks at what's called HDL, which HDL is what pulls cholesterol out. So it's that carrier that ships cholesterol. It pulls it out of the tissue and brings it back to the liver. It has a number and it kind of takes those two. And based on those, you kind of get the total amount of cholesterol that's in your system. But it's also looking at things that are hidden that you're not normally looking at with a regular lipid panel, but it looks at the cholesterol that's in what's called IDL and VLDL. And both of those you don't look at directly in a regular cholesterol panel, but it's taking a look at all of the different cholesterol in all the different vehicles. And based on that, it gives you a total number. Now, most people will be able to see there's a problem with that, because if HDL, what they call good cholesterol, is pulling cholesterol out of your tissue, plus what pushes cholesterol into the tissue, plus all those other factors, and you're just adding them all up, it's just like, let's say you have a room full of like gang members and police officers, and you just say you have 100 humans in the room. That doesn't tell you risk, right? That's just how many people are hanging out. Some of them may be bad actors. Some of them may be like saving your life.
So I love what you said, because I think this cholesterol thing needs to be looked at. What is it? It's like 4 in every 10 people die of a heart attack. I mean, that's like one of the biggest causes of deaths. And so if we don't demystify this whole cholesterol thing and get it figured out for the public to understand, because I hate to say it, the medical community is just so slow to adopt this. Because when I was in pharmacy school, it's all, oh, LDL is bad. And even I've learned now that HDL, which is the good one, which moves the cholesterol back to the liver to clear out the cholesterol, that can be dysfunctional. So it's like one of those type things that we don't know. So we talked about that. There's one other piece of a total cholesterol, in my opinion, that may be the best marker of a total cholesterol panel. That's actually a good indicative of cardiometabolic health and stuff. And that's triglycerides. Now that one I think is pretty useful. How do you see that as a marker of cholesterol?
So triglycerides is very useful. And one of the things that we have to realize is that number, the number that they use in the lab saying 150 and less is good, is really not as accurate as we'd like, right? So what we really shoot for is that triglyceride less than around 80. That's kind of what I shoot for. If not, then it tells me something else is happening. And I haven't heard this on any other show. So they are so lucky they're on this show, because they're going to hear this piece of information that nobody's ever probably talked about or they've not heard. When they're looking at triglycerides, it's not like they take the machine and they spin the machine and then they end up with, this is how many triglycerides, or this is how many triglycerides you have. As a matter of fact, triglycerides are fat. And fat, they're triglycerides, which is fatty acids, and then you have cholesterol in the blood work, and both of those don't mix well in water, and that's why they need carriers. And those carriers are going to take cholesterol to and from the tissue into the liver. So when they're looking at triglycerides, what they're actually looking at is they estimate how much triglycerides they have from the amount of what's called VLDL that they have. And VLDL is not looked at in a regular lipid panel, but they end up doing a formula. They look at something called glycerol, and they know that for every glycerol, that there is going to be 3 triglycerides, and they come up with a formula, and based on that formula, they kind of will estimate how many triglycerides are there. And I think that gets a little bit too technical, but I want people to know that they're not just looking at the triglyceride in the blood. It's actually a formula they're using, and it gives us a hint that something else is high. And what is that other thing that's high in the blood? And that's why we do advanced lipid testing. It's giving us a hint that we have a lot of VLDL floating around in the blood. And VLDL is going to carry both triglycerides, it's going to fatty acids, plus it's going to carry the cholesterol. And that's not looked at a regular panel. And that's why when you see somebody that has high amounts of triglycerides, then the thought is they have a whole bunch of VLDL. And not only that, they have a whole bunch of VLDL that is what's called triglyceride-rich VLDL, filled with those fatty acids. And those triglyceride-rich VLDL, when they go to tissue and unload the triglycerides, they end up turning into LDL or bad cholesterol. But if there was a whole bunch of triglycerides in them, think of it as like a balloon. The balloon and the balloon has cholesterol in it and it has triglycerides in it. If you have a whole bunch of triglycerides, you end up with a really small balloon. And that really small balloon, that slips in the cracks and causes high cholesterol way more than the big balloons, than like a bigger balloon or a bigger ball. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, and I got all that because we're about to jump into that.
Okay.
So the way I see triglycerides, let's see if you agree. Triglycerides is really, when they're elevated, it's a marker of excess. And the way I see it is that person, unless it's genetics, is typically an excess of calorie consumption or energy in, and the body has to do something with it. And you're right, it tries to shuffle it around in that VLDL, which is this packing chemical, because you're right. We don't, like you said, when we measure total cholesterol, it's just this big blob of all these lipoproteins and cholesterol. And that's why it's not really a good marker unless we look a little deeper.
Right.
But you're right. Once that VLDL drops off that triglyceride, then it turns into this not so friendly little LDL that's a bad guy.
Right.
And that's where advanced lipid panel comes in.
I want to talk about that, but I just want to mention one more thing with the triglycerides, right? So, and this is another thing. I want to put the things that they haven't heard before. So if you take a look at fat cells need insulin in order to bring sugar into them. And if you are overloading sugar, if you're overloading glucose, the body is going to keep releasing insulin in order to drive the sugar into fat cells, into muscle cells. But what happens is overdoing it, then the body's like, we can't take it anymore. So the cells start getting insulin resistant. When they're insulin resistant, what ends up happening to those cells is they end up increasing a enzyme inside fat cells called which is a lipase. And what that enzyme does, it's called hormone sensitive lipase. Insulin resistance increases hormone sensitive lipase, which causes the body to start breaking down the fatty acids in the fat and sending them to the blood. Then the blood the blood takes it to the liver. The liver repackages it. And when it repackages it, it sends it back to the fat again. And now you have these fatty acids that are going from the fat to the liver, to the fat, to the liver, and they keep eating and they kind of get overloaded. So you're absolutely right. It's overloading the system. And now let's go into what an advanced lipid test is going to look at. An advanced lipid panel is going to look at how many of those particles that can cause issue are floating around. And let me break it down a little more. Back to the fat cell. When you're insulin resistant, fat cells keep releasing fatty acids. And those fatty acids start going to the liver. And the liver has to repackage them. A fatty acid turns into triglycerides. And then you end up with what's called VLDL. The liver creates this VLDL, this carrier. And if there's a whole bunch of triglycerides, like in insulin resistance, that VLDL gets filled with fatty acids and a little bit of cholesterol. And what the VLDL ends up doing is it goes into the tissue and starts releasing the fatty acids, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And it can become the really tiny bad cholesterol. So what the advanced lipid test does, one of the things it does is it looks at the amount of the different sizes. So it looks at how many really tiny bad cholesterol, how many or LDL cholesterol, how many intermediate, and how many really large ones. And it's looking at all of them. So if you have a whole bunch of really tiny ones, well, those have a 1.7 time increased risk of going into the blood vessel and causing a clogging of the blood vessel. So by looking and being able to break it down, the really tiny, the intermediate, and the large, well, guess what? Now you're able to tell the riskier high cholesterol versus the least risky cholesterol. And a regular lipid panel is looking at a weight of LDL. It's not even looking at how many particles are floating around. So one piece is going to look at the really tiny, the intermediate, or the large one. But that's just one small piece to the puzzle.
No, and that's exactly it. And I mean, when I was taught many moons ago, and I know this just to make it simple for the listeners, is if you look at that epithelial or the endothelial lining, it's like a tennis net. And like you said, this is basic, but you're right. Those little BBs can fit through the tennis net, cause atherosclerosis. The big fluffy ones, the LDLs that really aren't harmful can't fit through that tennis net, and thus it doesn't cause that. So that's a really good analogy.
Right.
What are some of the other things that, I mean, do these advanced people, do they look at, like we mentioned earlier, like the function of HDL? Do they look at other markers like ApoB, LP little a? How do all those fit in? These are all things we're here and talked about. How do all those fit into an advanced lipid?
So let's talk about ApoB. A high ApoB is what we call a risk-enhancing factor. And a risk-enhancing factor, according to conventional guidelines, means that even We have regular risk calculators that we put people in to see their risk of having a stroke or heart attack. This actually, regardless of that number, makes them even riskier. They have an even higher chance of getting heart disease, right? And the risk enhancing factor here is if that ApoB is greater than 130. So what is ApoB? Well, remember how I said that it's not just LDL that can cause clogging of the blood vessels. It's a VLDL, which can turn to IDL. Both of them can cause clogging of the blood vessels. And then you can have big, fluffy, you can have intermediate, or you can have tiny bad cholesterol. So that's about 5 different types of cholesterol that can all cause an issue, that can all cause clogging of the blood vessel, right? In a perfect storm type of situation. So every one of those molecules that can cause atherosclerosis or clogging of the blood vessels, every single one of them has an ApoB on it. So when I look at an ApoB, I'm looking at, I get a number for all of the particles that can cause clogging of the blood vessels, and I want my ApoB less than 90. So if you told me, can I look at, is it Dr. Elyaman or Dr. E, do you prefer, if you had to choose one, a lipid panel or an ApoB, I would say give me the ApoB first.
And that's crazy when you think about that, because like that's not running, like you just mentioned 5 things that can cause clotting in your arteries, but a total cholesterol really doesn't give you any of that.
Correct.
So that's a little kind of crazy.
Now, there is a clue you can, here's the thing that people don't know either, right? There's a little clue in your total cholesterol, but it's not perfect because it's based on calculations. They do something where they subtract the total cholesterol from the HDL, or what they call the good cholesterol, and they come up with a number. And if that number is high, then that tells us then they probably have a whole bunch of those remnant or those IDL or VLDL, those extra particles that can cause a problem. So there's a chance, there's a correlation between both having a high non-HDL cholesterol, it's called, where you take the total, subtract that, a correlation between that and having a high ApoB. The problem is that more insulin resistant you are, the more the formula starts to break down and it's not as accurate. But if I see a high non-LDL cholesterol, if you look at your cholesterol and you see a high non-LDL cholesterol, then what you're going to, and it's called non-LDL cholesterol, then what you're going to want to do is make sure you get advanced lipid testing. I actually think everybody should get advanced lipid testing, right?
Amen.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I don't understand why it's so complicated. One other marker that I hear a lot about, and myself, because I have this myself, and it's fun. I've been able to move it, but quote unquote, it's genetic, is that LP(a). What's your take on that?
All right. So now you have the LDL, and we know that the LDL can potentially get squeezed in the cracks and cause a problem with a perfect storm. And we haven't even gotten to that part yet, because some people will have high cholesterol and it's not causing clogging. It's not causing an issue, right? So LDL, the cholesterol molecule or the cholesterol carrier that carries cholesterol to the tissue, some people can have what's called a LP(a) or an ApoA that is bound to it. And it's like a little flag, we call it a little kringle, that is hanging off the edge. And that little thing that hangs off the edge makes it easier for your body to clot. And part of what causes an issue is you have cholesterol that is jamming up and clogging the inner side of the blood vessels. And then if that thing pops, then what happens is the body puts a clot on top of it to fix the blood vessel. But if you overclot, then you get a worse stroke and heart attack. So those LP(a), which is genetically driven, some people genetically will have a higher chance of getting it than others. Bob Harper, right? Bob Harper from Biggest Loser, he had it. He was seeming pretty fit, but he had a heart attack and they were trying to figure out why. He ended up having a high LP(a). Well, that actually can, because it adds an extra layer of risk, having a high number of that can increase your risk. Although there are people that have a high LP(a), and we work on them and we optimize their numbers and they never have an issue.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we'll talk about. Some of these other things that if we optimize all those, even if you have that, your risk is minimal. But the thing I hear you saying is each of these little things adds another layer and one more risk. And it's like 1 + 1 = 3, plus one more equals 6. And without an advanced lipid panel, you can't get that.
Can't get all those
So
pieces.
I'm sure average listener is like, oh my gosh, this advanced lipid panel involves so many things. Like, how do you afford to do this? But there's also other markers that you can do in conjunction to cholesterol testing that tells a little deeper story. Can you tell me a little bit about that and like how you use that in your practice?
Absolutely. So now what we've talked about so far is getting a regular cholesterol panel you can get from most labs. Getting an ApoB you can get from most labs. If you want to push it even harder, you can find out the size of the LDL, which it'll be the tiny, the intermediate, or the large. I mean, I get it from our major labs. I mean, I'm a consultant for Quest in their wellness division. Just want to disclose that, but partially because this is what I do. Like, so they're big into the wellness space right now. But both LabCorp and Quest, you can get the sizes. But remember, the sizes don't tell us about the IDL or VLDL. So that's why ApoB, I think, is a better marker. But you can get an ApoB, and now you're looking with that, you're getting a good picture of those particles that potentially could squeeze in between the cracks. But now the question is you mentioned that layer, that blood vessel wall. What makes that blood vessel wall? What increases the chance of that cholesterol being able to get in between the cracks and stay there? And the answer is inflammation. There's a systemic inflammation that the body can have that causes a leakiness. Inflammation is meant so that we can fight against disease. And how do you fight against disease? You need white blood cells to go there. And how do you get white blood cells to go there? You release these inflammation hormones or chemicals so that blood flows in that area. So now what happens is that for certain conditions, like dental conditions, like bad bacteria in the gut, like also, so not having enough good bacteria in the gut or eating lots of processed foods, what ends up happening is that people will end up getting this high sensitivity CRP level starts to go up. That's the marker. But what that really means is that there's this chronic low-grade inflammation that's happening, and the blood vessel wall is tissue too. So what that does is it causes leakiness so that now your white blood cells can leak in between the cracks of the wall of the blood vessel. And also what can go with it is the different LDL particles that can slip in there, causing a plaque. And now what happens there is that some of the white blood cells called macrophages start swallowing it and creating what's called a foam cell, causing more and more plaque buildup.
That's crazy. So HSCRP is a good marker. I'd agree, because the way I see the whole cardiovascular disease process is you got to have inflammation.
Yep.
You got to have endothelial dysfunction, like you just mentioned, and then oxidative stress. You put all those together and shake them up in a bottle, and those are going to be your markers that are going to drive cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
So beyond HSCRP, what are some other markers that you like to look for to check for these processes that are pretty typical that you can see issues with?
Well, you nailed it. You mentioned it. You kind of cheated. You told them. You said oxidative stress. So what is oxidative stress? It's rusting, right? So it's when our body is taking in oxygen and making energy from that oxygen, well, we can end up with what's called oxidative stress, a rusting that can happen. And that rusting that can happen as we're making energy, you need antioxidants to be able to quell that, to be able to counteract that. But if there's inflammation happening, and if the body is overloaded and you don't have enough antioxidants, your body can rust. And one of the things that can start rusting is your LDL, the cholesterol carrier. And when it rusts, two bad things happen. Number one, it's more likely to leak into the cracks and to cause plaque. But the second bad thing that can happen, and a lot of people don't know this, I was interviewed by I don't know if you know him, Dr. Sanjay Bojraj. He's a functional medicine cardiologist, and he talked to me about the autoimmune component of cardiovascular disease. What ends up happening is those oxidized LDL look foreign. Now they're rusting. So the body thinks it's a foreign invader. So it makes antibodies to attack the oxidized LDL, and you get anti-LDL antibodies, and you get an autoimmune condition where the body's starting to attack it, causing more of a problem happening. So you can look at an oxidized LDL level to see if there's too much that's been resting. You can look in the urine at something called F2 isoprostanes. And the way I remember it, I say, don't say FU, say F2. And then I remember, don't say FU, say F2, say F2. F2 isoprostanes. F2 isoprostanes high in the urine is telling me there's more oxidative stress. And then here's the other little kicker. Actually, I'll give you two more that people don't actually think about. One is, when I was in school, when I was in residency, when we were learning how to take care of patients, there is a marker called GGT. And that marker, when it was up, it's telling us that there's a liver problem happening. Well, it turns out most of these processes are happening in the liver in the first place. And what GGT actually is, it is a byproduct of glutathione. And glutathione is our master antioxidant. So if you see a GGT level higher than 40, then what that's telling you is that this person is undergoing a lot of oxidative stress. This stuff is rusting, and this rust is going to make them more prone to getting those blood vessel walls clogged up.
Very cool. So you threw a lot out there. I mean, that's a lot of information stuff. But like you said, though, and I like the analogy of the autoimmune. And I think like you said, that's a relatively new thing, but it's just like, it's inflammation and a dysfunctional immune system that takes our cardiovascular system and makes it compromised and causes all these problems. So that's very, very interesting. Let's take a deeper dive. So you mentioned like a lot of cardiovascular markers. Let's take a deeper dive and maybe some of like you mentioned insulin resistance yourself earlier. That's a huge driver. Talk about some of the markers you like to monitor in terms of insulin resistance that are add-ons that patients can do to kind of get a full picture.
Okay, so insulin resistance, basically your body isn't tolerating sugar as well. It's creating insulin, and then the body is not dealing with that insulin properly. So an insulin, once you have high insulin resistance, you start to have other things like high blood pressure. It lowers nitric oxide. Once that starts happening, most people that have a high small density LDL have fatty liver disease. So you can kind of take a look at that. So insulin resistance is very important to take a look at. And I just want to tell you a shocking statistic. They took a group of men that were in their 20s and they tested them, and their weight was normal. They weren't overweight. And they tested them to see if they were insulin resistant. And guess what? 40% of them were insulin resistant. And these are normal. These are young men that are normal weight. Now, how do we test it? Well, you can take their insulin and their glucose and you can put it through a fasting, and you can put it through a formula, and it's called a HOMA-IR score. And you can look at that score, and that can tell you if it's insulin resistant. You can take a look at triglycerides over HDL, and that can give you a hint of insulin resistance. If your ApoB is really high, you're probably insulin resistant. So that's another thing. And then Quest Diagnostics has a proprietary test called an insulin resistance score. They don't tell us what's in it, but they validated and showed that it is pretty accurate at telling that you're insulin resistant. So, but the cheap, dirty way is you check fasting insulin, you check a fasting glucose, you look at it. And I personally will check what's called a C-peptide, because if the C-peptide is high, when your body releases insulin, it releases something called proinsulin, which is C-peptide and insulin. Insulin is used fast. The C-peptide lasts a little bit longer. So that tells me if they're like really overdoing the carbs. If the C-peptide is, because sometimes the C-peptide is high and the insulin level is not so high because the body's using it up. But in summary, like insulin, C-peptide, maybe a glucose level, and maybe an insulin resistance score, all fasting, and then then you can tell, hey, this person's insulin resistant.
I love that you do the fasting insulin and all that, because like that's what I hope one day they come out with the insulin meter. Like I'm tired of wearing a CGM, but I would love to know my insulin. I mean, be honest with you, I think we all agree in functional medicine that's a better marker,
right?
So one thing you mentioned, we were talking earlier, how does methylation play into this cholesterol?
Yeah, so methylation, one of the ways that the body the body kind of turns on or turns off certain neurotransmitters or hormones is through something called methylation. Methylation is also, it's needed in order to get rid of toxins and chemicals. And what it is the molecules, carbon with 3 hydrogens, CH3, which is called a methyl group, and your body will, the liver will, usually in the liver, but in different parts of the body, what happens is that one molecule will pass on that CH3 from one area to the other. And if that is jammed up, then you're probably not making neurotransmitters as well, which can cause depression, anxiety, and all those things. You're probably not able to metabolize histamine as well, which can cause a lot of histamine things like itching and a lot of those histamine things that we have, but also you're probably not detoxifying as well. And when you have, and what ends up happening is it starts to get jammed up and you have something called homocysteine that shoots up. And when you have high homocysteine, number one, it increases the chance of the clogging of the blood vessels. Number two, it's going to increase your risk of autoimmunity because it's a toxin. Number three, it's going to help it's going to increase your risk of getting Alzheimer's. And I shoot for less than 8. I check the homocysteine and I want to make it, if it's less than 8, then that's telling me that they're all right. If it's higher than 8, I'm going to work on certain things to try to bring that down.
Very good. So we've checked that advanced lipid panel. We see all these markers. We look for insulin resistance. We're not methylating. We have all these problems. So the answer is we just give them a statin and we fix it.
Yeah. You just give them a statin.
Is that the answer?
They do amazing. So statins. So now let's talk about statins. All right. That's great. Right. So I'm not anti-statin, but I am anti giving everybody the same freaking thing. Right. We got to look at what's causing it and not just say, if you have this, take that. As a matter of fact, if you look at the data, if you look at what drives the cholesterol to go in the blood vessel wall, one of the big drivers is having high blood pressure, because that pressure is going to drive it into the wall of the blood vessel. It's going to drive the cholesterol because now the pressure is higher. And if you get their blood pressure down, you significantly decrease the risk of strokes and heart attacks, right? So cholesterol, where we have really good data on statins potentially decreasing outcomes. And these tests, unfortunately, a lot of the studies we have were done before 2006 when the pharmaceutical companies were not as tightly regulated. So they could start a study, they don't like the result, they scrap it. They try again, they don't like it, they scrap it. They try again, oh, this showed that it worked, let's go ahead and put it in there. But even with that data that we have, they've done large population studies where they took a look at and you kind of put them all together and you see what the research is looking like. And if you look at something called primary prevention, just in general, if somebody doesn't have diabetes or active heart disease, and they just looked at people just trying to prevent strokes and heart attacks, they have something in statistics called number needed to treat. And number needed to treat can be anywhere from 100 to 250, which means that for every 100 to every 250 people that go on a statin for primary prevention, you get one less event in like 5 to 10 years, depending on what they're looking at, right? So what about the 99 or what about the 249 that were on a statin and it didn't help and it potentially caused a side effect? That's what we got to look at. That's a huge number. Now, if you do advanced lipid testing, you can start risk stratifying. You can start looking more and more and more. And now this guy is smoking and he has sky high ApoB and he has inflammation and oxidative stress and doesn't want to make any changes. Well, maybe, buddy, you should probably be on a statin, right? Type deal. But for people that are like, no, I want to get on root cause and I want to work on it, and they're primary prevention and they're not high risk, we'll give lifestyle a chance, right? Statins do lower cholesterol, but one of the main reasons they think statins might help is that they lower inflammation. So is it the inflammatory thing or is it the cholesterol thing, right? And they're not the only thing out there, but they're the things that I think we have the most research on. And I think people fixate on them so much. And because they don't want to have to figure out, and because it's easier to say, hey, your cholesterol is high. As a doctor, I give you a cholesterol pill and the cholesterol is lower. And now I look like a hero and move on happily ever after. But they can come with risks. and everybody's different.
So I got a question for you, because I get this all the time. Patients don't do well on statins, but they go in and do a traditional cholesterol panel. Numbers are high. Their traditional medical provider on insurance, their doctor, because of protocols, it says that patient has to be on a statin, because if not, that doctor looks bad in all their HEDIS scores and all that kind of stuff. So my question for you is how does that patient convince their practitioner? You're right, and this is what I say. Give me 6 months of lifestyle and doing supplements. What does that look like to you as a practitioner? How can that patient explain that to a doctor to give them a chance?
Well, here's the sad thing. Current guidelines at certain levels of risk don't even say give them a statin. It says have a risk-benefit discussion and make a decision with the patient. Yet they didn't get the memo, or it just takes too long. So if they actually want to follow conventional guidelines, even with a standard lipid panel, they're going to look at other risk factors. They're going to look at going to look at blood pressure. They're going to give them their risk. They're going to put it in a risk calculator, and they're going to say, "Hey, here are your chances of having a stroke and a heart attack without, and here are your chances with." And if they and here's number needed to treat for every 30 people on it, for every 40 people with your numbers that go on a statin, we get one less heart attack. It has nothing to do with deaths, just one less heart attack every 5 to 10 years, right? So that's the issue. Plus, what about risks? What about statins being a mitochondrial toxicant? So they could potentially hurt your mitochondria. They can stop mitochondria from growing. We've seen this. People exercise without a statin versus with a statin. Mitochondria don't like to grow. Those are those little powerhouses within your cell. More mitochondria means more energy, means more health, right? So what about the fact that they can cause neuropathy? So, and then on top of that, let's go a deeper level. If you're going to put somebody on a statin, figure out what else the statin is blocking. It's going to block miniquinone 4. So now they can get vitamin K blockage. And then now you're blocking vitamin K. So you get calcium deposits of their blood vessels. And then you get osteoporosis. It can also block like your production of vitamin D. You can also block, so already you should be thinking, shoot, if you're on a statin, you should be on, I put them on miniquinone 7 because it has a higher half-life, but be on some sort of vitamin K. If I'm on a statin, I'm going to want to make sure, at least check a CoQ10 level, make sure that it's up there. I like 3 or higher. Let's see what that is, because it can suppress CoQ10. And then the other piece is, so then you kind of look at what it can mess up, and then you kind of give the body what it needs. It could lower hormones, so check hormone levels. But then the other piece to it as well is that these statin medicines are not all the same. Yes. Some of them are going to cross the blood-brain barrier easier. So there is a barrier where our blood interfaces with our brain and our cerebral spinal fluid. And that barrier isn't crossed by everything. But you have statins like atorvastatin that cross very easily into the brain. Now the brain makes its own cholesterol. And now you're going to start dropping brain cholesterol, more chance of side effects. There are 2 statins that don't cross into the brain as well, which we want. We don't want them to cross in the brain. Pravastatin and rosuvastatin. The other thing is rosuvastatin has a longer half-life. So you could actually give a tiny dose of rosuvastatin twice a week, right? Instead of and there's research that supports this. So it's not just, hey, you have high cholesterol, take a statin drug, live happily ever after. There is a lot of work to do, whether they need a statin or not. And the 2 categories of people that have a high case for maybe needing a statin is once you've went from insulin resistance to hyperglycemia to diabetes, and now you're diabetic, you are higher risk. And if you've already had a heart attack and stroke, you're higher risk. That's called that's primary prevention, or that's secondary prevention. That's very different than preventing the first one from happening. So it is nuanced, and it's not something that there are too many people that go on these statins, and it is absolutely not even indicated. But how do you convince your doctor? Tell them to watch this podcast episode. And I challenge you.
That's
right.
No, that's cool. And you nailed it. It is so nuanced, but there's so much data out there now. That's the sad part is I think patients are out there. I think patients have done more research than the medical provider, which I'm not knocking them. We're busy and we're doing all these things, but you have to stay up with it because it's definitely changing. So you mentioned if you don't want to take a statin and you'd like to do maybe some lifestyle things, what are the other things maybe you're checking and looking out that could drive up, quote unquote, a high total cholesterol that need to be addressed and looked at? What do you look at there?
Okay. So once again, if they have a whole bunch of the really tiny bad cholesterol, then I'm going to go right to working on insulin resistance and toxicity, right? So from an insulin resistance point of view, I love berberine, right? There, I work, I'm actually the medical director of a company called Human. I'm sure it's in there, part-time thing as well. And Human actually makes a berberine that I like. It's called berberine complex. And it's called a phytosomal berberine. And what it does, it doesn't affect the stomach as much. It's well absorbed. It's like 10 times better absorbed. But that being said, berberine can actually significantly help with insulin resistance. And I see it do really well lowering cholesterol levels and the tiny bad cholesterol levels. I also use it when I have people that have fatty liver as well. I will sometimes give people, to me, it's like a healthier statin. I sometimes will give people red yeast rice, but red yeast rice. There was a study, the China study, that actually looked at around 5,000 people, and they looked at giving these people that had heart disease, they gave them red yeast rice instead of giving them a statin. And red yeast rice has a naturally occurring statin, but the benefit, the less deaths they had from that did not equate to the amount of the statin that was in it, which means there's other things in red yeast rice that may actually be helpful, right? And basically what they showed is a 30% reduction in heart attack deaths on this study of 5,000 people, but nobody's talking about it. But one of the challenges is that if you get the wrong kind of red yeast rice, it might not have the active ingredient, and it also could have a toxin called citrinine, which every batch should be checked to make sure there's no citrinine in it, because you don't want to hurt the patient as well. So red yeast rice, I would definitely think about with the work with your healthcare provider, so that they can be watching what they need to watch, and then still take a look at the CoQ10, take a look at the vitamin D, take a look at the vitamin K, and make sure all those things are optimized as well. There's niacin. Niacin has been around for years, and I'm not talking about someone that's already maxed out on a statin and their cholesterol is already low, and then give them niacin plus another drug that was mixed with the niacin and saying, oh shoot, it didn't work. I'm talking about starting slow. You could give people nicotinic acid, but you got to watch the liver and you got to watch and see what can go wrong. But all those things are very helpful. And what's very helpful really is lower carbohydrate, higher protein, higher complex carbs, more healthier fats, and exercise. And that works that's probably one of the best things. Dark chocolate is helpful too. And I'm not talking about like the store-bought, like over-the-counter groceries, like gas station chocolate. I'm talking about like the higher 75% or more cacao type of chocolate. That's helpful. Green tea is helpful. So there's many things that I think that are helpful. And it all depends. Do they have LP little a? If they do, then there's certain things that we would do. Do they have, is it the really tiny ones? So you're going to want to look at all that big picture. If they have a problem with methylation and their homocysteines, I work on that first and then see what happens to the cholesterol. And I think you alluded to this in the first question. When you're looking at cholesterol, are you looking at the smoke or the fire, right? Is this like an alert system? So the first step when you see your cholesterol, you want to know, you want advanced lipids to know if it really is a smoke signal or not. But I think the reality is a lot of it is a smoke signal. There is a root cause that is pushing it. And everybody's different genetically on what would cause their cholesterol to go up. And as you hear, I'm not against statins. I'm just against doing it irresponsibly.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you mentioned, like you said, it's just very complicated. It's not really a cholesterol. Like you said, you mentioned infections earlier, gingival issues. You just talked about toxins and gut health and genetics and micronutrients. And there's just so many things that can affect cholesterol. And I think that's what makes it so complicated. And that's why it really does take more of a functional medicine approach to look at it, because this isn't easy. So what about the person out there that's like, okay, I hear all this. I don't have the tens of thousands of dollars to do all these tests and that kind of stuff. What do you say to that person out there that wants to really make sure they don't have a heart attack and stroke, but want to take a dive in this? What do you have to say to them?
Well, let me give them a bare bones protocol that they should get at a regular lab. Check an ApoB, check a high sensitivity CRP, check so now that's your inflammation. If you can check a GGT, it's cheap. We didn't talk about this. I would check a uric acid, get it less than 5.5. right? That's a cheap test that they can get. If that's high, that increases the risk. Check a homocysteine level, and then check a insulin, a fasting insulin, and glucose, and then take a look at all those and see, like kind of like you were mentioning, that smoke signal. See if the body's giving out smoke signals, and then look at your symptoms, and look at what you're eating. Are you eating processed foods? Are you eating the different fruits and vegetables, the different colors? Like, to take a look at that from a more holistic point of view, and then if you feel well. And then what insurance should cover, smoke signals. We didn't talk about thyroid, but definitely thyroid is doing a thyroid panel. I did a podcast on that where I was interviewed on that. If people want to look for thyroid, but if you want, we could do another one just on thyroid. And I don't know if you have any on thyroid. Have you done any?
I haven't done a full one on thyroid. I've talked about thyroid, but I haven't done a deep dive. So that would be a great idea for the future. That's for sure.
But I'd like to, because people get overwhelmed when they hear all of this. I've been doing this for years. I mean, I've been a physician for 25 years. I've been doing functional medicine for probably like 18, 17 years. And I'm constantly learning, and I'm constantly learning new things. And some of the stuff I said, I learned in the last couple of years, because you're constantly updating, right? You're constantly trying to learn and figure things out, and with inquisitiveness. But I would like to just give people a little bit of hope in that there is only a few, we in functional medicine, we narrow it down to 7, but there are 7 underlying imbalances that can cause disease, surrounded by your psychological, spiritual state. And if you can understand those 7 imbalances and really study them, then those imbalances are what lead to all the different diseases. And if you can do that, you really are empowering yourself to be able to look and see what is actually going on with your patient, versus just letting them give us a guideline number as if everybody's genetically the same.
Yeah, and I love that. Like you just said, inflammation and immune dysfunction drive so many diseases. And for some people, it may rear its head in an autoimmune condition, or it may be cognitive decline. But in some people, because of certain things, it's cardiovascular disease, and it's all those same processes. So many things you talked about aren't just cardiovascular; they apply to all these other things. And I love what you said. It's we can work on diet and sleep and exercise and movement and some supplements. Those can go a long way for a lot of these things, and you don't have to spend a crazy amount of money. And I really like your analogy on that. So you're right. I could sit and talk to you. We could go probably till midnight tonight. But I really appreciate this. But you brought up so many good things, and this is exactly what our audience is looking for. Dr. E, people can see you're very knowledgeable in this whole cardiovascular things. If other people want to learn more about you, whether it be a patient or practitioner, where can they find more information about you?
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for having me. I would say across social media platforms, if you follow me at Dr. Elyaman, I do host the FMP Essentials show. It's the Functional Medicine Practitioner Show. You can find it on YouTube or across Spotify or iTunes, but it's called the FMP Essentials Show. It's spoken to at the level of the patient. So, and I interview various doctors and healthcare providers on various health topics. Like, I get the experts in the field, so they can look at the podcast. If you're a practitioner, please don't feel a practitioner. I mean a chiropractor, a pharmacist, a physician, a nurse practitioner, a PA, a health coach. All of us that are doing healthcare, that are taking care of patients, really should be looking with a functional medicine lens, and that's why we have FMP Essentials, fmpessentials.com. We have a sold out mastermind. So if you're interested in we actually just launched it and just sold it out. So if you're interested, you can go find it and kind of get on the waiting list. And apart from that, I'd see you guys online. Let's jump online. I'm trying to be like Steve here, which you're killing it on Instagram, huh?
Hey, I'm trying, just like you. We've got to get the message out about this. And I think people are looking for it nowadays. So there's definitely an avenue for that. That's for sure. For sure. Well, like you said, so we all know somebody who has cardiovascular disease, whether it's ourselves or our family members, or, be sure that you like this podcast. Hopefully you learned something from it. I learned a lot today. Be sure that you share with your friends and family who maybe suffer from cardiovascular disease. And I really appreciate you taking a deep dive into cholesterol, statins, basically advanced lipid testing, because this is what patients need. And we've learned today that, this whole cardiovascular disease, heart health, it's more than a number. It's more than cholesterol. It's so much more, from inflammation to metabolic health and all those. And I really appreciate you taking time out to spend time with us today. And I want to thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Dr. E, thanks so much. And until next time, keep seeking the truth about how the body works. Have a great day.